The Senate has had multiple votes going on throughout the day, but the main one, I want to put this up on your screen, is what we now know, that the Senate did vote on the Shutdown Fairness Act. That vote ultimately failing at the beginning of this hour. And so if you're not familiar with what we're talking about here, today the Senate was voting on whether or not to advance the Shutdown Fairness Act. This was a bill that was put forth by GOP Senator Ron Johnson. The current version of the legislation would pay federal employees who have continued to work throughout this shutdown, but Johnson has an amendment that would also pay furloughed workers. The motion to proceed needed 60 votes to ultimately succeed. Johnson noted that major unions representing federal employees also supported this legislation. But about 10 to 15 or so minutes ago, we watched as that ultimately failed.
It's absolutely wild, and I mean that. Because something just happened that Trump has been desperately trying to avoid for his entire presidency. The Senate, including Republicans from his own party, just voted to strip away his war powers. Yeah, you heard that right. The United States Senate just passed a resolution to block Trump from launching military actions in Venezuela without congressional approval. And Trump couldn't stop it. He tried. He pressured senators. He threatened them on social media. He attacked them publicly. And they voted against him anyway. This is unprecedented. This is a sitting president losing control of his own party on one of the most fundamental presidential powers, the authority to deploy military force. And it's exposing just how weak Trump's grip on Washington.
The Senate did not reach the 60 vote threshold needed to advance that. The vote ended with a 53 voting in favor and 43 voting against it. 3 Democrats did vote for this bill. It's important to note. Senators Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock of Georgia, both senators from Georgia, as well as Senator Bay Lujan of New Mexico.
Something done in order to come together for a set of proposals that will lower health care costs. And both as a member of the committee, we both serve on Senate Finance, as well as the chairman of the Health Committee, it is my intent to do that. We've got to do that. But this can work this year for Americans who are going to be on the exchanges.
On January 8th, 2026, the Senate voted 52-47 to advance a war powers resolution that would bar Trump from conducting further military operations in or against Venezuela without explicit congressional authorization. Now, that might sound technical, but what it actually means is huge. The Senate just told the President of the United States that they don't trust him with the power to start wars, that he needs permission from Congress before he can deploy troops or launch strikes. That's a massive rebuke. And here's what makes it even more stunning. 5 Republicans voted with Democrats to make this happen. 5 GOP senators looked at Trump's behavior, looked at what he was doing in Venezuela, and said, no, we're not letting you drag us into a war without oversight. We're putting limits on you, whether you like it or not. Those 5 Republicans were Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Rand Paul, Josh Hawley, and Todd Young. And every single one of them voted to advance this resolution, despite intense pressure from Trump and the White House to stay in line. Trump had personally called some of them. He had his staff lobbying them. He was threatening them on Truth Social, and they voted against him anyway, because they decided that checking presidential war powers was more important than loyalty to Trump. And that vote, that 52-47 vote, it went through. Trump couldn't stop it. He couldn't kill it. He couldn't prevent the Senate from formally advancing a bill to curb his commander-in-chief authority, and that's what makes this so significant. Because for the first time in his presidency, Trump faced a direct challenge to his power from his own party in the Senate, and he lost. He couldn't intimidate enough senators, he couldn't keep them in line, and the vote happened despite everything he did to prevent it. Now, here's the context you need to understand why this vote happened. Days before this Senate vote, Trump ordered a dramatic military strike in Venezuela. His forces conducted a raid that captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Yeah, Trump literally sent special forces into Venezuela, grabbed their president, and brought him to the United States. It was an unprecedented military operation, and it raised immediate bipartisan alarm bells. Because senators from both parties started asking, okay, what's the plan here? Are we going to war with Venezuela? Are we occupying their country? Are we trying to control their oil? What happens next? And Trump didn't have good answers. His administration was vague. They talked about restoring democracy. They mentioned Venezuela's oil reserves. But there was no clear long-term strategy, no plan for what comes after you kidnap another country's president. So senators, including Republicans, started panicking. They realized Trump might be dragging the United States into a major military conflict in South America without thinking through the consequences. And they decided they needed to put limits on him before this spiraled completely out of control. So this war powers resolution was their answer. Congress saying we're reasserting our constitutional authority. Article 1 gives us the power to declare war. And we're not letting you start one without our approval. And when the vote came up, 5 Republicans decided that was more important than backing Trump. Now, Trump went ballistic. He posted on Truth Social that these senators should never hold office again. He said they were impeding the president's authority as commander-in-chief. He claimed they were siding with America's enemies by trying to restrict his military options. But none of that mattered, because the vote had already happened. And it's on the record. The Senate formally advanced a bill to curb Trump's war powers. And Trump couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't veto it before the vote. He couldn't stop senators from voting their conscience. He could only watch as his own party broke ranks and voted to limit his authority. And that's a devastating blow to his image, because Trump's whole brand is built on being powerful, being in control, being the guy who always wins. But here he lost publicly on national security to his own party. All right, so let's dig into exactly what this resolution does and why Republicans were willing to defy Trump to support it. Okay, so let's talk about what this war powers resolution actually does, because understanding the specifics makes it clear just how significant this Senate vote really was. The resolution bars Trump from conducting further military operations within or against Venezuela without explicit congressional authorization. That's the key phrase, and without explicit congressional authorization, which means if Trump wants to send more troops, launch more strikes, expand the military operation, or do anything beyond what's already been done, he has to come to Congress first and get approval. He can't just order it unilaterally. He can't claim commander-in-chief powers and do whatever he wants. Congress has to sign off. And if they don't, the military action is illegal. Now, presidents have been chipping away at congressional war powers for decades. They've launched military operations without formal declarations of war. They've claimed that the authorization for use of military force from 2001 covers basically everything. They've argued that they have inherent Article 2 powers to deploy troops whenever they see fit, and Congress has largely let them get away with it. There have been complaints, some symbolic votes, but nothing that actually stopped a president from doing what they wanted militarily until now, because this Senate vote is different. This is Congress, including members of the president's own party, saying, no, we're drawing a line, you've gone too far, and we're reasserting our constitutional authority before you drag us into a war we didn't approve. Now let's talk about why this vote happened. Why did 5 Republicans break ranks? What made them willing to defy Trump on such a fundamental issue? Well, it goes back to the Venezuela situation. Trump's capture of Nicolas Maduro was dramatic. It was bold, and it caught everyone by surprise, but it also raised huge questions, because kidnapping another country's president is an act of war. Venezuela could have responded by attacking U.S. interests. They could have called on allies like Russia or China for support. They could have launched retaliatory strikes, and if that happened, the United States would be in a full-scale war in South America. A war that Congress never authorized. A war that could drag on for years with no clear exit strategy. So senators started demanding answers. What's the plan? How long are we staying in Venezuela? Are we trying to install a new government? Are we taking their oil? What are the objectives? And Trump's administration couldn't give clear answers. They talked in vague terms about democracy and freedom, but there was no detailed plan, no strategy for what comes after the dramatic raid. And that terrified senators, because they could see this turning into another Iraq or Afghanistan, a military adventure that starts with bold promises and ends with decades of occupation and thousands of American casualties. So the 5 Republicans who voted for the War Powers Resolution, Collins, Murkowski, Paul, Hawley, and Young, they looked at this situation and decided they had to act. Now, these aren't all the same kind of Republicans. Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski are moderates. They've been willing to break with Trump before on issues like healthcare and judicial nominations. Rand Paul is a libertarian who's been skeptical of foreign interventions for years. Josh Hawley is more of a populist nationalist who's critical of endless wars. And Todd Young is a foreign policy hawk who believes strongly in congressional oversight, so they come from different parts of the Republican Party. But they all reach the same conclusion. Trump can't be trusted with unchecked war powers in Venezuela. So they voted to limit him. And that vote went through 52 to 47, which means Trump lost. Despite all his pressure, despite all his threats, despite all his rage on social media, the Senate voted to curb his authority. Now, Trump's reaction was predictable. He went on Truth Social and attacked the 5 Republicans who voted against him. He said they should never hold office again. He claimed they were betraying America. He accused them of siding with dictators and enemies by trying to restrict his military options. And he framed the whole thing as Congress trying to weaken the presidency and make America vulnerable. But here's the thing, Trump's attacks didn't work. The senators who voted for the resolution defended their votes. They said they were upholding the Constitution. They said Congress has war powers for a reason. And they said they weren't going to rubber stamp military adventures without proper oversight. So Trump's usual tactic of attacking and intimidating people into submission failed. These senators stood firm. And that's a huge crack in Trump's armor, because it shows that some Republicans are willing to prioritize constitutional principles over loyalty to Trump. And once that dam breaks, once some senators show it's possible to vote against Trump and survive, more might follow. Now, here's where things get complicated, because even though the Senate voted 52 to 47 to advance this resolution, it didn't ultimately become law. Later, procedural maneuvers and a tie-breaking vote by Vice President J.D. Vance managed to block final passage. So the resolution didn't actually bind Trump in the end. But that doesn't change the significance of the original vote, because that 52 to 47 vote is on the record. It's a public statement that the Senate, including 5 Republicans, wanted to limit Trump's war powers. And Trump couldn't stop that vote from happening. He couldn't prevent the Senate from formally rebuking him. So even though the resolution didn't become law, the vote itself is a massive blow to Trump's authority. It shows weakness, it shows that he can't control his own party, and it gives ammunition to anyone who wants to argue that Trump's power in Washington is slipping. And this isn't happening in isolation. This Venezuela vote is part of a broader pattern of Republicans starting to break ranks with Trump. We've seen it on other issues too. Some Republicans have criticized Trump's Greenland annexation talk. The House nearly passed a similar war powers resolution. It ended in a tie, which shows how close Trump came to losing there too. Republicans have broken with Trump on the Epstein files, on healthcare subsidies, on various other issues. And each time it happens, it emboldens more Republicans to consider defying him, because they see that the political cost isn't as high as they feared. Trump attacks them, but they survive. Their constituents often support them for showing independence, and the sky doesn't fall. So the Venezuela vote might be a tipping point, the moment when enough Republicans decided that blind loyalty to Trump isn't worth sacrificing their constitutional responsibilities. And if that's the case, Trump is in serious trouble, because his entire governing strategy depends on Republicans staying in line. If they start voting their conscience instead of following his orders, his presidency becomes unmanageable. There's also a deeper issue here about presidential war powers and accountability. For decades, presidents have been expanding their authority to use military force without congressional approval. They've launched strikes in Syria, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, and dozens of other countries, all without formal declarations of war. And Congress has mostly let it happen. But Trump's Venezuela operation was so brazen, literally kidnapping another country's president, that it forced Congress to confront the issue. Because if Trump can do that unilaterally, what can't he do? Where's the line? And senators realize there is no line unless they draw one. So this vote is about more than just Venezuela. It's about reasserting congressional war powers more broadly, about saying presidents don't have unlimited authority to start military conflicts, and about checking executive overreach before it becomes completely normalized. Now, Trump and his defenders argue that this resolution weakens America, that it ties the president's hands and makes it harder to respond to threats, that enemies will see this as a sign of division and weakness. And there's a version of that argument that makes sense. You don't want Congress micromanaging every military decision. Commanders-in-chief need some flexibility to respond to urgent situations, but that's not what this resolution does. It doesn't say Trump can never use military force. It says he needs congressional approval before launching major operations like invading Venezuela or trying to overthrow their government. That's not micromanagement. That's basic constitutional